Hello everyone, and thank you for joining this session on Connecting the Dots with Persistent Identifiers, Libraries Leading the Way. My name is Sheila Rabin, and I am the ORCID US Community Specialist at Lyrasis. This presentation will be of interest to anyone working in libraries that are storing unique content in maybe an institutional repository, publishing your own content, helping to keep track of scholarly activities and works associated with your organization, or if you're involved in supporting open research, the research process, research data management, or any related activities. I'm going to start with a brief story that I'm retelling from a presentation that my colleague in Australia, Melroy Almeida, shared at the PIDapalooza conference in January of this year. What you're seeing here is a data visualization showing the research organizations who were working on coronavirus research in December of 2009. There were roughly 1,500 research organizations involved, and the graph highlights participation from the United States and Great Britain. Fast forward 10 years, in December of 2019, over 3,000 organizations were involved, and this time we see countries like Spain, Brazil, and China participating a bit more. And now, as of December 2020, which was just a few months ago, the number of organizations has grown exponentially to almost 47,000 organizations involved in coronavirus research. And through this visualization, we can actually zoom in and see which organizations were involved, who's collaborating, how many publications have come out, and how the research was funded. And all of this is thanks to persistent identifiers, or PIDs. In this case, as noted on the slides, the data from this specific PID graph is coming from ORCID and DOIs, which we'll talk more about in just a minute. And while this coronavirus visualization is somewhat of an extreme example, the point here is that libraries can use persistent identifiers to more efficiently and accurately gather information needed to assess and measure institutional impact. Things like tracking faculty publications, managing and tracking use of institutional resources, and working with research data and data management plans, for example. So to make sure we are all on the same page, let's do a brief review about what PIDs are. PIDs stands for Persistent Identifiers, and PIDs are basically unique labels or references that allow us to disambiguate people, places, and things in the research and scholarly landscape, regardless in changes over time, to help us gather information and answer questions about research and scholarship. So for example, if we were looking for a specific person who was involved in a certain research project, we can use ORCID ID to uniquely identify the person we're looking for to make sure it's the right person, even if their name is a common name or if their name has changed over time. If we're trying to identify objects that were involved or related to specific research, like equipment, data sets, and publications, we can use DOIs, or digital object identifiers, to indicate precisely which object we're talking about. In this case, a publication. And if we are trying to identify where certain research took place or what organizations were involved, we can use the Research Organization Registry, or ROR ID, to uniquely identify the institution in question. In this case, it's Auburn University. And these are just a few examples, but with these and other persistent identifiers, we can disambiguate people, places, and things, regardless of language, naming, or changes over time. The more we can use PIDs across the research and scholarly ecosystem, the more we can answer questions about things like how many research organizations participated in coronavirus research, for example. Who was involved? How many publications came from that research? And who is collaborating with whom? Now, to highlight some of the most common PIDs, you may be familiar with ORCID, which stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. ORCID IDs are unique persistent identifiers for people, specifically people who are involved in research or other contributions to society. Anyone can get an ORCID ID for free, and the ORCID organization manages the ORCID registry with support from organizational members across the globe. ORCID allows individuals to distinguish themselves from others, regardless of name or changes in name over time, and keep information about their affiliations and activities in one centralized place, similar to what you would see on a CV. But ORCID is not a CV. Rather, it is an interoperable hub for metadata about researchers and their affiliations and activities. No matter what changes a person goes through in their career, their ORCID ID will stay the same and link them to their contributions across time, distance, and borders. Now, ORCID member organizations like libraries, funders, and publishers can use ORCID within local systems to connect with individuals' ORCID records to get information about those individuals' activities and outputs. And organizations can also add relevant information to their researchers' ORCID records. ORCID serves as a shared standard for uniquely identifying individuals, and organizations can benefit from using ORCID to streamline collection of data about research and scholarly activities, as well as assert affiliations between individuals and the institution to confirm employment, education, or other activities associated with the institution. And all of this is designed to save time and reduce administrative burden by allowing information to be entered into ORCID once and then reused often. Now, some potential challenges for using ORCID really have to do with the fact that individuals are central to ORCID. Individuals have full control over the metadata contained within their ORCID record, and individuals must take action by registering for an ORCID ID and making sure they have information populated in their ORCID record. So getting this message out to individual researchers is typically one of the biggest challenges to ORCID adoption at an institution. And another thing is, to get the most value from ORCID, libraries need to partner with other internal organization stakeholders such as the research office, sponsored programs, and central IT. And that can sometimes be a big challenge at some organizations that are maybe decentralized or have a high degree of staff turnover. Now, when it comes to identifying things, and specifically things like publications, research data, and other unique objects, DOIs are typically the most widely used PID. And there are other identifiers for specific types of objects. For example, there's something called IGSN, that's for Earth science samples. But DOIs are typically the most widely known. DOI stands for Digital Object Identifier, and the object that a DOI identifies does not have to be digital, but the identifier is digital, and it's usually expressed as a URI hosted at doi.org that corresponds to a metadata record about the object. And you're probably familiar with DOIs already because most online journals use DOIs, and many repositories also use DOIs to identify their unique items. The example that you're seeing here is a DOI for a slide deck presentation about Hein Online and ORCID. So if this resource gets cited by others, but let's say the URL for the resource changes over time, the DOI will stay the same, so it can always be found by other researchers in the future, and we can avoid the 404 page not found error that often occurs with content on the web as it migrates over time, things like broken links. So for DOIs, there are a few organizations known as DOI registration agencies that manage the logistics behind DOIs. The two organizations that are most used in the US are Crossref and DataCite. Crossref more commonly supports DOIs for publications, and DataCite is more inclined to support DOIs for things like data sets and a wide variety of other types of things, including images, sounds, software, and more. So Crossref and DataCite are both supported by member organizations that want to assign DOIs to their own local materials. And each member organization must submit metadata that corresponds to the item that they're assigning a DOI to, including a URL that points to either the item itself or a web page that contains information about the item. So DOIs provide a shared standard for permanent identification of content and things. And when libraries assign DOIs to their local content, whether it's content in a repository, an open access journal, open educational resources, special collection materials, or anything else, we can really more easily manage those local assets, track usage of those assets through machine actionable, disambiguous citations that contain the DOI, and ensure that content is persistently accessible over time. And ultimately, again, this is to save time and reduce administrative burden, and also to build trust in the research and scholarly landscape. The biggest challenge when it comes to DOIs is really just making sure that the metadata related to the identified object, and especially the URL or the location of the object, is kept up to date over time, as well as the persistence of the object itself. So DOIs are supposed to be reliable forever, so ensuring that continuity and sustainability of DOIs and the metadata behind them is key. Another great thing to note about ORCID and DOIs, and really all PIDs, is that ORCID IDs can be included in DOI metadata, and DOIs can be included in ORCID metadata, and that helps to link the people and the objects together in a shared, persistent way over time. Now, just so that you're aware, there are many other types of PIDs besides ORCID and DOIs. For example, there are ARCs, which stands for Archival Resource Keys, which can be used similarly to DOIs, but they don't require the same metadata that DOIs require. So ARCs can be assigned to any person, place, or thing that does not already have an identifier. For DOIs specific to grants, if you're working with grants at all, the Crossref organization is now helping funders assign DOIs to specific grants to ultimately help track which publications have come from what grant funding over time. There are also PIDs for organizations, and there are a few different ones out there, but the Research Organization Registry, or ROR, is becoming the primary open organization identifier. And ORCID, DataCite, and Crossref are all moving towards using ROR in their metadata. Crossref also has a unique persistent identifier specifically for funding organizations, which, like the DOIs for grants, the Crossref Funder Registry helps link publications and other output to their funding source. And finally, there's another up-and-coming PID for research projects called RAID, which stands for Research Activity Identifier. And honestly, there are even more PIDs out there that we just don't have time to get to today. But if you want to learn more about these and other PIDs, I encourage you to visit the PID Forum, which is a great place to ask questions and get more info from the global community. And also check out PIDapalooza, which is a conference festival committed to PIDs. Now, all of these PIDs work together like an ecosystem, and the more people and organizations using PIDs, the more we can all benefit from the connectivity and fairness that PIDs facilitate. You may have heard of the concept of fair data in terms of research and scholarship. So FAIR stands for Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Re-useable. And here I'm citing a recent article on connected research and the potential of the PID graph, and that source is noted here on the slide. So when we use PIDs for people, places, and things, we can support fair data by ensuring the research and scholarly content is findable, because PIDs make it easier to locate and cite the correct entity, which then encourages reuse and recognition. And PIDs make it easier to automate the flow of information between systems, or interoperability, which improves speed and accuracy in reporting and the sharing of research outputs, which can lead to discovery and innovation by exposing the links between research outputs for anyone to use. So all of this builds trust in the research ecosystem. And also, the many PIDs that we have talked about today have open metadata, if not pointing to open content, in the spirit of shared benefits for all. Now, when it comes to libraries leading the way, libraries in the U.S. are definitely leading the way when it comes to ORCID adoption, which can benefit academic libraries and universities at large. Evidence of libraries using ORCID can be found throughout the ORCID US community, which is a national consortium for nonprofit ORCID members in the U.S. Formed in 2018 as a partnership between Lyrasis, the Greater Western Library Alliance, the Northeast Research Libraries, and the Big Ten Academic Alliance, the main goal of the consortium is to build a community of practice around ORCID in the U.S., ultimately making it as easy as possible for individuals and organizations to use ORCID to their benefit. Currently, there are 143 member organizations, most of which are universities, and at those universities, it has been the libraries overwhelmingly leading ORCID adoption efforts, not just for ORCID integrations with library systems, but for other systems on campus, not to mention outreach to researchers to encourage ORCID adoption. There are countless examples of how libraries are leading the way with ORCID, but since I can't cover them all today, I will share just one really great example from North Carolina State University. So NC State Libraries has a custom citation index site that tracks publications by NC State faculty, and they have integrated ORCID with their citation index so faculty can formally link their ORCID ID to their citation index profile. And this allows faculty's ORCID ID to be displayed next to their name in the citation index and allows for works listed in ORCID to be imported into the citation index. At the same time, works from within the citation index can be added to the faculty's ORCID record, with the trusted source appearing as NC State University Libraries. Librarians are doing outreach to raise awareness and working with faculty in various academic departments to encourage use of this ORCID connection service. And faculty that have their ORCID ID connected can also have their public faculty profile page information automatically updated based on the information from their ORCID record. So shout out here to the excellent team at NC State for their work on this great example. And there are literally hundreds of other examples, but we just don't have time to get to them all today. So with the progress that has been made in the ORCID US community so far, Lyrasis has also just this year launched a DataCite US community consortium for nonprofit organizations that want to create DOIs for their unique materials. And since there are already several libraries that have been leading the way and working directly with DataCite, the goals for the Lyrasis DataCite Consortium are to contribute to the existing community of practice around DOIs in the US and globally, and to provide an on-ramp to libraries that are just getting started with using DOIs. We just launched this initiative in January of this year, and we're starting to build this community, which is mostly libraries so far, and they're all creating DOIs for items in their institutional repositories and other open content, and we're all just getting started and learning together. So if you're also interested in getting started with DOIs or ORCID or other PIDs, definitely get in touch with us. And so to close, I just have a few recommendations about actions that you can take to help lead the way with PIDs right now. So if you don't already have your own ORCID ID, you can go ahead and register for one. Your organization can become an institutional ORCID member so that you can integrate ORCID with your local systems. And of course, you can always encourage others to use ORCID. You can also become an institutional DataCite or Crossref member and assign DOIs to your institution's unique content. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, do join the PID forum. It's a great global communication channel for everything related to PIDs. And I recommend looking into the PIDapalooza conference, which takes place annually, usually in January, and all of the presentations are about persistent identifiers. And last but not least, please do feel free to email me and reach out. Here's my contact information. I do look forward to answering any questions and hearing from you all. Thank you so much for attending this presentation today.